one day we're going to play contact frisbee just because it's fun when we come out in an interview. But the thing you understand of someone like Jonas, who's done an incredible, successful career, is he's tasted success. And what I have found with people that are successful, they've learned to become more guarded with their time and their energy. And they have to. And you have to realize is that they have to. Because what happens is there's a lot of people that want to take from them different things. And to some degree, they expect that, to some degree. But there's also a point of, hey, I got to protect myself so you don't take everything I have. And that the more successful people you deal with, that's something that I'm very cognizant of when I interview them. So not just Jonas. I can give a few other examples like Robert Sawyer, Fonda Lee, right? It's not a bad thing. I don't want people to get the wrong idea here. It's not a bad thing at all that they're like this, because what tends to happen is with that is we have this tendency as a. Not a bad thing at all that they're like. Hold on a second. Sorry, I hit the wrong button here. Okay, done. Right button now. No, what tends to happen is they are open to engagement, but because of the nature of what they've achieved, they've had to close some doors to protect themselves, and you have to understand that going in. The one time I interviewed a politician, the biggest thing I realized when I interviewed a politician is that they believe they believe it. They have to believe in what they're doing, right? And they have it's how you sell. Yeah, sales is about belief. It's always about belief. It's not about anything else. And they have to believe in what they're selling. So when you're dealing with a politician, you have to understand that you're going to be dealing with whatever hype they're promoting at the time. Doesn't mean if you corner them as human beings and you can do it, you can get them the best up, but you'll never do that on camera, ever. Right? But off camera, you can. Again, they're human beings off camera, but on camera, you have to recognize, okay, this is a persona I'm dealing with here. Yeah. So I'm not going to be able to get the same kind of interview as I could with, say, you. Not because you're going to become an uber successful guy someday, and when you do that, you're going to do the same thing. You'll have to be a little more guarded. You have to be, but at the same time, this is the weird thing for guys like us. I work so well because I'm so open. Right. I'm not sure what I'm going to have to do with that going forward.
I think it's more of the language of speaking than it is of what you're saying, right? Mm-hmm. So it's more of the guardedness really comes from they're open to a certain extent, but it's the subject matter that you're approaching that would be open. Like if you're sitting there talking about their movie, they'll open up about the movie and what happens on set, as long as it's not something that embarrassing to them, or which it never is. I mean, you're always talking about if anybody's out there to try and get them to be embarrassed or anything, I don't look at that as journalism, or I don't look at that as a good interview. I look at that as somebody just trying to make a name for themselves, and that's not right. But I do think that when they speak, they know the words to say to be careful, and thus it seems like they're open, but they've also learned the vocabulary of being careful. So it's an easier transition to look like they're being careful and still look like they're being open. It's kind of a magic trick in that respect, but it's not really magic. It's just using the right words.
I think the word we're looking for here is diplomacy.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
A little bit. But it's not even so much diplomacy as it is there's a good word for it, but I can't think of it right. But diplomacy is kind of the idea, but it's not even that, because you can, if they're doing a movie about a taboo subject, they're open to talk about the taboo subject, just as long as it's not reflected of them as that taboo subject. You know what I mean?
There's a clear line between their personal life and their persona. Mm-hmm. Right. That's I think the big thing between them is there's a difference there. Yeah. But but you can sometimes get the two of them together, and that's really interesting when you do, because what tends to happen there is people have this tendency to how do I put this? They open up. Given enough time, it doesn't matter who you are, you open up. You just have to learn how to listen. And that's actually a very funny thing. I was mentioning this to a friend of mine last night. Like I did a bonus podcast last night.
Yeah.
I double booked. And after air, I told him about this. Like the real secret to interviewing, honestly, is listening. A lot of interviewers don't actually listen, which is really interesting.
Yeah, that's a skill set. It's something you have to learn too. I mean, and but if you're an interviewer and you're waiting to talk, that's not a very good interview anyway, because you're going to monopolize the conversation, and then you're not getting anything out of the person. So you want to have these open-ended questions where they're going to talk more than you're going to talk, and I think that helps the aspect of listening too.
But what do you do when you get a quiet person? Because there's a tricky balance with that, because I have found that people that are quieter, you need to be able to carry the conversation as an interviewer as well. It really depends on the guest and how comfortable they are expressing themselves. Some people are just naturally quiet too, which I think is and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I just think that so one of my favorite people to interview is Riley Rossmo. I like him. He's a good dude. He's a really good dude, but he's a quiet guy. There's nothing. He's never gonna. He's very passionate about what he's passionate about, and to the rest, he doesn't say very many words. It's not how he expresses himself the best, right? And he would rather draw something, or again, actions go a lot farther with him than words. And I think just my own opinion on there, but again, he's a quiet guy, so you're not going to get a big in-depth unless he's really into it. He's really, really passionate about it. So,
all right, let's give a trade secret here. Something how to deal with quiet people is to ask them a question that they've never been asked before, of something that is very, very important to them. If you do enough research on anybody, you can find something that's going to trigger them to speak about it. And so, like, for example, if somebody was a big horror fan and they've always wanted to write horror, but they've never wrote horror. How come you've never wrote horror? I see you talk about horror all the time. And they'll give you the answer, because that's something they're real passionate about, and they'll want to talk about it. And that's probably a bad example, but you get the drift. It's basically get them to talk about something that they really, really like. And once they do that, they knock the wall down. And
everybody's got those icebreakers. You gotta find them. For me, the interview that I always think about that one is Calvin Jim. Yes, I remember like when we started talking, it wasn't bad. We were having a good conversation, but there's like a moment, and I didn't know it. I felt it when we were doing the interview too. The ice broke, and once the ice actually broke, right?
Yeah.
The conversation completely leveled up. Actually, Calvin's one of my favorite people to talk to, actually. So he's a really, really deep, insightful dude. And it was like, but for that first 10, 15 minutes, there was a feeling out process in the interview. And you could feel it. And but again, once the ice broke, it broke. And then it was like one of my favorite conversations that year too. So.
I had a similar thing. Alexa Bryan, who is a young lady who's an activist in Canada who does Indigenous rights activism, and she's a second or third generation Indigenous in Canada, and she's young, so she was very nervous and very guarded at first. And then I talked to her. She's been raised and fostered by her grandmother. And so I talked to her a little bit about her grandmother and a couple of things that I found that nobody had ever asked her. And I asked her this question, and then boom, opened up, and it was a good conversation. It was again, that's the cool thing about it too. Once you get them unguarded and you feel that icebreaker, it becomes a really great conversation, because you realize that they're really great people. They just needed an opportunity to show it.
Well, I think I just think it's just one of those things where you got to find where people have something to say, like what something they really have something to say about, and giving them the confidence and to have that opinion. That's where ultimately listening actually kind of going full circle. Like,
Yeah.
a good interview is ultimately about listening. So,
and it's funny too because I'll be oftentimes, and I'm sure you've had this experience, somebody's first interview, and then they'll come back and they'll do another interview and another interview down the road, and I'll do those I'll see a difference in them because we've talked and gathered, so I'll see that happening, and that makes
looks like we got visitors.
yeah.
Right now, I'm interviewing JoeCompton of Go Indie Now on the broadcast, whatever you want to call it, and we're talking about interviews and what makes a good one and a bad one.